The tactical command center reeked of stale coffee and arrogance. When I walked in with the breakfast tray, a young captain sneered, "Look, the sandwich cavalry is here." They had no idea I was the only one who could save them. My world was measured in 4 a.m. alarms and the industrial hum of ventilation systems. Here, at Ares Forward Operating Base, a high-tech spearhead thrust into a forgotten corner of the world, my domain was the kitchen. It was a sterile kingdom of stainless steel, smelling perpetually of bleach and the fresh bread I baked before dawn. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. To the hundreds of soldiers, analysts, and officers I fed, I was just Eris, the quiet cook. 35 years old, with auburn hair I kept disciplined in a tight bun, and a slender frame that disappeared behind a rolling cart of food. They didn't know about the doctor part. They didn't care. To them, my expertise was in yeast activation and protein-to-carb ratios. My daily battle was against blandness. I moved through the base like a ghost in a grease-stained apron, my steps silent, my eyes, a watchful, observant gray, missing nothing but saying even less. Around my neck, tucked beneath my collar, lay the only relic of a former life, a worn leather cord, darkened with sweat and time, holding a single, custom-forged titanium emblem. One side bore the faded relief of a chimera, a beast of myth, part lion, part goat, part serpent. The other held a sequence, JSOCTDG07. It was a secret I kept pressed against my skin, a constant, low-grade fever of a memory. The daily friction was a familiar irritant, like a stone in my shoe. The young hotshot pilots and cyber warfare specialists would swagger into the mess hall, their conversations loud with acronyms and technical jargon. Sometimes, they'd try to include me in their world, their voices dripping with condescension. "Hey, Eris," a young lieutenant might call out, gesturing to a tablet displaying a complex engine schematic. "Think we should go with the cryo-cooler or the standard radiator on the new recon drone?" I would just offer a small, empty smile, wipe down a counter that was already clean, and retreat into the steam and clatter of my kitchen. Their laughter would follow me, light and careless. They saw a woman who made sandwiches. They had no idea I used to help design the stealth insertion routes those drones flew. They saw my hands, calloused from scrubbing pots, and never imagined them field stripping a rifle in the dark or applying a tourniquet under fire. This morning was no different. The air was thick with the pre-mission tension that always settled before a major operation. My cart was loaded with high-energy protein bars, fresh fruit, and 2 large carafes of brutally strong coffee. My destination was the heart of the base, the place I avoided most, the Tactical Operations Center, or TOC. As I pushed the cart down the sterile gray corridor, the quiet hum of the base's life support seemed to amplify the clatter of the metal wheels. Each rotation was a countdown. I passed holographic projectors displaying weather patterns and digital clocks showing Zulu time. I was a relic of the analog world, pushing my humble offerings into the gleaming, digital brain of modern warfare. The automatic doors to the TOC hissed open, and I stepped inside, into the cold blue glow and the palpable weight of imminent failure. The TOC was a cavern of cold light and hushed, urgent voices. A massive holographic map of the treacherous local mountain ranges dominated the center of the room, its blue and green topography a stark contrast to the grim faces bathed in its glow. Analysts sat at tiered consoles, their screens filled with cascading lines of code and data feeds. The air smelled of ozone and burnt coffee. Colonel Marcus Vance stood before the map, his weathered face set like stone, a faint white scar pulling at the corner of one eye. As I wheeled my cart to the designated corner, Captain Eva Rostova, a sharp-featured officer with an immaculate uniform and an air of supreme confidence, noticed my arrival. She leaned over to a fellow officer and, with a smirk that didn't reach her eyes, murmured just loud enough for me to hear. "Excellent. Our tactical nutritional support has arrived." A few chuckles rippled through the nearby staff. It was her signature brand of humor, intellectually dismissive, designed to reinforce her place in the hierarchy. I ignored her, my movements deliberate as I began setting out the cups. But my eyes were drawn to the holomap. To a specific sector highlighted in angry red, Sector Gamma 9, a place known colloquially as the Serpent's Coil. Nomad Squad is pinned down, Colonel Vance announced, his voice a low gravelly rumble that cut through the background noise. They walked into a ghost ambush. No electronic signature, no heat bloom until the first round was fired. They're blind. Suddenly, the main screen flickered, switching from topographical data to a live feed from a high-altitude drone. The image was grainy, a monochrome nightmare of rock and twisted brush. 3 green heat signatures, Nomad Squad, were clustered behind a pathetic-looking rock formation. Red indicators, representing incoming fire, blossomed all around them from unseen positions. The radio chatter filled the room, a desperate symphony of static, strained breathing, and calls for support that went unanswered. EV fire from the ridge. We can't get a fix. Jax is hit. I repeat, Jax is hit. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos, the shrill, rhythmic beeping of a flatlining heart rate monitor from one of the soldiers' biosensors. A green light on the team display winked out. My hand froze on a coffee carafe. The polished metal felt impossibly cold. My own breathing hitched. I recognized the terrain. Not from a map, but from memory. I knew the feel of that sharp, shale-like rock under my palms, the way the wind howled through that specific canyon just before an attack. And then I saw him. One of the green signatures, the one designated Nomad lead, moved with a familiar, desperate urgency. Evans. Staff Sergeant Evans. My mind flashed back, a chaotic, muddy memory from a lifetime ago. Objective Anvil. Rain, so much rain, turning the earth to a greedy, sucking sludge. Hauling a younger, screaming Evans out of the mire, his leg a mangled mess, my arms straining, promising him he'd make it home. On the screen, he was trapped again. The window for extraction is closed, Captain Rostova stated, her voice devoid of emotion, a clinical assessment of fact. The new terrain mapping satellite shows the only viable path, the North Gully, has collapsed. It's a kill box. Any rescue attempt would be suicide. She moved to the console, her finger hovering over the button to advance the presentation, to move on to contingency plans, to accept the loss. The room was a tomb, the only sound the dying whispers from the radio. They were about to write them off. Erase them. Turn them from soldiers into statistics on a slide. A tremor went through me, an ancient, dormant volcano stirring to life. The cook, the quiet woman in the apron, died in that moment. The ghost of who I used to be took her place. Wait. The word was quiet, but it sliced through the silence of the TOC like a surgeon's scalpel. Every head turned towards me. Rostova's finger froze. Colonel Vance's tired eyes narrowed, focusing on me for what felt like the first time. Silence. Not the respectful silence of a briefing, but the stunned, incredulous silence that follows a breach of protocol so profound it borders on madness. Captain Rostova slowly turned, an expression of pure disbelief on her face. What did you say, cook? I took a step forward, away from the safety of my cart. I said, wait, I repeated, my voice steady now, finding a timbre it hadn't used in years. You're reading the terrain wrong. Rostova let out a short, sharp laugh. I'm sorry, are you offering a tactical analysis? The satellite data is less than 12 hours old. It's a direct topographical scan. It is fact. It's a picture of rocks, I shot back, my gaze locked with hers. It doesn't show you the history. It doesn't show you the blood that's soaked into the ground. Your fact is going to get them killed. Colonel Vance held up a hand, silencing Rostova before she could retort. He walked slowly toward me, his eyes scanning me from head to toe, as if trying to solve a puzzle. You have something to say, Dr. Thorne. I suggest you say it. The use of my title, retrieved from some deep dive into my personnel file, was a test. He was giving me an opening. I reached up and pulled the leather cord from around my neck. The titanium emblem felt heavy in my palm. I stepped forward and placed it on the edge of the holographic projector. It clattered with a sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous room. Eris Thorne, Ph.D., I stated clearly. Task Force Chimera. JSOCTDG, serial number 07. Vance's aide, a young lieutenant, was already typing furiously at his console. He looked up, his face pale. Sir. Task Force Chimera was a Tier 1 asset. Deep reconnaissance and recovery. They were officially disbanded 5 years ago. Classified circumstances following heavy losses at Objective Anvil. The name hung in the air, a ghost in its own right. Rostova's arrogance faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. I was the unit's sole survivor, I said, my voice flat. And Staff Sergeant Evans is one of the men I pulled out of Anvil. He's my asset. You are not leaving him behind. The conflict in the room had shifted. It was no longer about a cook speaking out of turn. It was about two opposing philosophies of war. Rostova, with her faith in data, in technology, in the clean, sanitized predictions of a supercomputer. And me, with my faith in instinct, in scars, in the brutal lessons learned from crawling through the very mud they were now viewing from orbit. Their extraction route is not the North Gully, I said, walking directly to the holographic map. That's a feint the insurgents have used for a decade. I looked directly at Rostova. Your satellite sees stones, Captain. It doesn't see the ghosts hiding beneath them. That route, my team and I validated it with our own blood. Without waiting for permission, I plunged my hand into the holographic display. The blue light enveloped my arm. With a precision that felt both foreign and utterly natural, I traced a new line through the complex terrain, a path that snaked through a seemingly impassable series of ravines and caves. The line glowed a stark, angry red on the map, a wound carved into the accepted reality. The Chimera Pass, I whispered, the name coming unbidden to my lips. It's not on any map. It's a ghost route. It will take them behind the ambush. It's their only chance. I pulled my hand back. The red line pulsed in the silent room. I had revealed myself. I had laid my past bare on their altar of technology and protocol. The choice was no longer mine. It was Colonel Vance's. He stared at the impossible red line I had drawn, then at the fading green signatures of his dying soldiers, and finally, at me, the ghost who had just walked out of his kitchen. The air in the TOC was thick enough to chew. The assembled officers stared, trapped between the glowing red line on the map and the woman in the cook's apron who had drawn it. Captain Rostova stood rigid, her certainty shattered, her face a mask of conflict. The decision rested solely on the shoulders of Colonel Vance. He studied my face for a long, silent moment, his weary eyes searching for something, proof, insanity, a reason to break every rule in the book. He seemed to find it. He turned away from me and spoke into his wrist calm, his voice low but carrying absolute authority. Tower, this is Vance. Prep a little bird for immediate departure. Single passenger. Scramble call sign Ghost 7. All standard protocols waived by my authority. He paused, his next words meant for the permanent record. Log it as a high-risk terrain survey. Unofficial. He had given me the green light. A deniable, off-the-books, career-ending if it failed green light. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the TOC. The hiss of the closing doors shut out the stunned faces and the glowing map. My stride was different now. The tentative shuffle of the cook was gone, replaced by the purposeful, ground-eating pace of someone with a destination. I didn't go back to the kitchen. I went to the personnel block, to a row of storage lockers in the basement, stopping at one that hadn't been opened in 5 years. The lock was stiff. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of canvas and gun oil. There it was, my go bag. A dusty, faded tactical pack that held the other half of my life. The transformation was a ritual. The apron came off, folded neatly and placed on a shelf. Out came the worn, multicam combat fatigues. The fabric was softer than I remembered, molded by use. As I dressed, the muscle memory was instantaneous, a ghost limb twitching back to life. The combat boots felt like a natural extension of my feet. I strapped a holster to my thigh, the worn leather a familiar weight. From a specially lined case, I took my M9 pistol. It felt cool and solid in my hands. I field stripped it on the concrete floor, my fingers moving with a speed and certainty that belonged to another person. Cleaning, oiling, reassembling, the methodical clicks of the metal parts were a calming prayer. I slammed a magazine home, the sound sharp and final in the quiet basement. Lastly, I clipped the titanium chimera emblem to the outside of my body armor, right over my heart. It was no longer a hidden secret. It was a declaration. 20 minutes later, I was on the tarmac. The little bird helicopter squatted under the harsh floodlights, its rotors already beginning to spin with a low whump whump whump. As I climbed in, the pilot, a young warrant officer, gave me a wide-eyed, questioning look. I just nodded, my face set, and pulled on a headset. The helicopter lifted off, a dragonfly rising into the bruised purple of the twilight sky. The orderly grid of Ares FOB shrank below, a bastion of light and logic against a world of chaos. My world. My focus was already miles ahead, in the winding valleys and shadowed ridges of the Serpent's Coil. My mind was no longer on recipes and supply lists. It was a high-resolution map of its own, overlaid with memories of ambush sites, hidden water sources, and the graves of friends. I was no longer Dr. Eris Thorne, the cook. I was Ghost 7. And I was going hunting. The helicopter banked hard, heading for the red zone. Through the headset, the pilot's voice was tinny. "Dropping you at the prearranged coordinates, ma'am. Comms go dark on your signal." I keyed the mic once. Acknowledged. As we descended toward the jagged maw of the forest, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was heading back into hell, but this time, it felt like going home. The chopper hovered. I swung out, and dropped the last 10 feet, landing silently on a bed of pine needles. I gave the pilot a thumbs up, then melted into the trees. Over the radio, my last transmission was a whisper. Ghost 7 is on the ground. Going dark. The forest of the Serpent's Coil swallowed me whole. The air turned cool and damp, thick with the scent of moss, decaying leaves, and something else, the metallic tang of old fear. This place was a graveyard, and I knew most of the ghosts by name. My boots made no sound on the forest floor. My breathing was controlled, a slow, rhythmic cadence that matched the whisper of the wind through the gnarled trees. This wasn't just geography to me, it was a living entity, a predator, and I had learned its language long ago. I moved without technology. No GPS, no night vision. I navigated by the feel of the ground slope, the direction of the wind, the faint star map visible through the canopy. At the command center, they were watching my progress through the tiny pinhole camera on my gear, seeing a shaky, disorienting view of darkness and foliage. They were seeing a miracle. I was just taking a walk down a street I knew all too well. Here was the ridge where we lost Diaz. There, the stream where Jacobs told his last bad joke. Every rock and tree was a memorial. The wind sounded like the hiss of an incoming mortar. I wasn't just walking through a forest, I was walking through the echoes of my past, and I used them to guide me. After an hour of silent, relentless movement, I picked up their trail. Not with my eyes, but with my nose. The faint, acrid smell of spent cordite, almost washed away by the evening dew. A single, fresh boot print, deeper on one side, indicating a man favoring a wounded leg. They were close. I found them huddled in a rock cleft, nearly invisible. Their camouflage was perfect, but their fear was a palpable thing. Evans was conscious, a crude field dressing on his shoulder, his face pale in the gloom. The other surviving soldier was alert, his rifle pointed in my direction before he even fully registered me. I didn't raise my weapon. I raised a single, open hand. "Easy, Nomad," I said, my voice a low calm. "I'm a friend." The soldier's eyes widened, seeing the impossible, a lone operator, appearing out of nowhere. Evan squinted, his mind clouded with pain and exhaustion. He looked at me, then his gaze drifted down to my boots, caked in the same dark, reddish mud he was lying in. A flicker of recognition sparked in his delirious eyes. He reached out a trembling hand and weakly grasped my arm. "I know you," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "I smell it, the mud smells the same as at Anvil." A faint smile touched my lips. "I told you I'd always come back for you, Staff Sergeant," I said softly. "I'm here to finish the job. We're going home." Hope, a thing more powerful than any weapon, flickered back into their eyes. I gave them water, checked their wounds, and got them moving. The extraction was the antithesis of their disastrous insertion. It was silent. It was fluid. I led them not away from the enemy, but through them, using the Chimera Pass, a treacherous route that took us through a narrow cave hidden behind a waterfall. The sound of the cascading water masked our movements completely. We walked within 50 yards of an enemy encampment, so close we could smell their cook fire, and they never knew we were there. There was no gunfire. No shouting. Just the sound of 3 wounded men breathing, and my quiet instructions guiding them through the darkness. It wasn't a firefight, it was a ghost story, and we were the ghosts. When we reached the extraction point on the far side of the valley, the little bird was already descending, a dark angel coming to retrieve us. As the medics rushed forward to take the wounded, Evans looked at me, his eyes clear now. They said you were gone." "Reports are often wrong," I replied, stepping back, allowing the shadows to reclaim me as the organized chaos of the medevac took over. My return to Ares FOB was met with a stunned, silent reception on the tarmac. Officers and enlisted alike stopped what they were doing, their eyes following me. I offered no report, no salute. I simply walked past them all, my mission complete. Ignoring the path to the TOC and the debriefing that awaited, I headed straight for the one place that felt right. Someone called my name, but I didn't turn. I had a more pressing duty. I pushed open the doors to the kitchen, the familiar smell of bleach and steel welcoming me home. They needed hot soup and medical attention. I needed to wash my hands. The next day, the atmosphere in the Tactical Operations Center was fundamentally different. The usual swagger and loud confidence were gone, replaced by a quiet, contemplative mood. Colonel Vance had called a mandatory debriefing. I was not on the attendee list, but he had sent a private message, "Be there." I entered through the main doors, this time without a food cart. I wore a simple, clean set of base fatigues, no apron. The room fell silent. Every eye was on me. Captain Rostova stood near the front, her posture straight, but her former arrogance was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Colonel Vance stood before the main holographic map. He pointed to the jagged red line that still scarred its surface. "As of 0600 this morning," he announced, his voice resonating with authority, "this route is officially designated Chimera Pass and is being added to all tactical overlays. Let the record show it was charted not by a satellite, but by the expertise and courage of a single operator." He then turned and looked directly at Rostova. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and faced me. In front of the entire command staff, she executed a flawless, sharp salute. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I was wrong. I let data blind me to experience. My ignorance nearly cost 3 men their lives. I apologize." I gave a slight nod to accept it. There was no victory in her apology, only a necessary correction. Colonel Vance picked up the titanium Chimera emblem from the console where I had left it. He held it out to me. "This belongs to you," he said. I looked at the emblem, then back at him. I didn't take it. That belongs to everyone who didn't make it out of Objective Anvil, I said quietly, my voice carrying in the silent room. I don't need it to remember who I am. I just need to know that the next time a soldier calls for help from a place that isn't on the map, our first answer won't be to write them off. My gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of the officers who had laughed at me a day before. Their expressions were now a mixture of awe and respect. I had earned my place not with a rank or a medal, but with action. I turned to leave, my part in this story finished. At the door, I paused and looked back one last time. Gentlemen, and ladies, I said, my voice calm but cutting. Next time you dismiss someone based on the uniform they wear, or don't wear, remember this, the most critical variable on any battlefield isn't the technology. It's the person you underestimate. The door hissed shut behind me, leaving them in a silence more profound than before. I walked back to my kitchen. Back to my routine. But I knew, and they knew, that nothing was the same. The quiet cook was now a legend. A ghost who had walked out of the shadows to save her own, and then returned, seeking no glory, asking for no reward. Heroes don't always wear flags on their shoulders. Sometimes, they wear aprons. They operate in the quiet spaces, doing the hard work that no one sees. They don't need headlines, they just need to know that when the call comes, someone will answer. In your life, have you ever met a quiet hero? Someone whose ordinary appearance hid an extraordinary strength or skill? Share your story in the comments below. We believe these stories need to be told. Please, always comment with respect for everyone's experience. And if you believe that heroes are forged, not just born, subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss the next story from the shadows.